Please don't kick me. I'm already hurt, the waitress cried. Julia pressed her back against the cold brick wall behind Tony's diner, her uniform still damp from the coffee a customer had purposely poured on her minutes earlier. At 34, she was used to invisible bruises, the kind that came from working 3 jobs to keep her 8-year-old son fed and housed. Her hands shook as she wiped her tears, not from the burns on her arm, but from the customer's final words. Maybe if you weren't so clumsy, you wouldn't be stuck serving people like me. What she didn't know was that inside the diner, a man in faded jeans and a simple button-down shirt had witnessed everything. David Chun, worth more than some small countries, had been sitting quietly in the corner booth. But what he'd just seen made his chest tighten in a way he hadn't felt in years. Julia had worked at Tony's diner for 8 months, ever since the car parts factory where she'd spent 6 years shut down. The job barely covered rent for the tiny apartment she shared with her son, but it was honest work. Most customers were kind, truckers, older couples, people who appreciated her warm smile. But lately there had been more difficult ones, people who seemed to take pleasure in reminding her of her place. David had been visiting the diner for 3 weeks. He always ordered the same thing, black coffee and whatever pie was fresh. Julia thought he was a working man, maybe a contractor, with his simple clothes, rough hands, gentle voice, and generous tips. She had no idea he was the CEO of Chin Industries. For months, David had been visiting small restaurants around the country in disguise. His company bought struggling businesses and rebuilt them into thriving community spaces. But he didn't trust spreadsheets. He preferred to feel the atmosphere himself, to see how people treated each other when they thought no one important was watching. One customer, Frank, had been troubling the staff for weeks. He mocked Julia, spilled drinks on purpose, insulted her appearance, and always left without tipping. David had watched it grow worse with each visit. Tonight, it crossed a line. When Julia returned inside, trying to compose herself, Frank barked, "Hurry up, and try not to spill it this time." The diner fell silent. Julia approached his table with the coffee pot, hands trembling. She couldn't afford to lose the job. Her son's school had sent another notice about overdue lunch money, and the electric bill was already late. Just as she began to pour the coffee, David stepped forward. He gently placed his hand over the cup. "No," he said. "Julia, you don't need to serve someone who treats you as less than human." He turned to Frank. "I've watched you insult her for weeks. This stops now." Frank stood abruptly, bristling. "Who do you think you are? Just some blue-collar nobody." "Maybe," David said calmly. "But I know the difference between a man and a bully." He placed a $100 bill on the table. "Your meals are covered for the next month. But if you can't treat the staff with respect, you'll need to find somewhere else to eat." Frank muttered angrily and stormed out. Julia stood frozen, tears of relief welling in her eyes. No one had ever defended her like that. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. "You've been enduring it for weeks," David replied softly. "Just because you can survive something doesn't mean you should have to." He invited her to sit with him, and she reluctantly agreed. When he explained that he was considering buying Tony's diner, Julia's heart sank. Another corporate buyer could mean losing her job again. But David quickly stopped her fears. "Julia, you're the reason I want to buy this place. I've watched how you treat people, how you work hard, how you care even when you're struggling yourself. You've taught me more about leadership than any business course ever could." He handed her a business card. David Chun, CEO, Chun Industries. Julia stared at it in disbelief. "I want to buy this diner," David said, "and I want you to help me run it. Not just as an employee, but as a partner. You understand people. You understand community. That's what matters most." Tears streamed down Julia's face. "Why me?" "Because anyone can manage numbers," David said. "Not everyone has your heart." Underscore. _ 6 months later, Julia stood in the newly renovated restaurant, now called Julia's Table, watching her 8-year-old son, Michael, arrange fresh flowers on the tables. The transformation was astonishing. Warm lighting replaced the sterile fluorescence. Local artwork decorated the walls. A garden behind the diner supplied fresh herbs and vegetables. But the biggest changes weren't physical. Every employee now earned a living wage and health care. 2 single mothers, a retired teacher, and 3 teenagers saving for college all worked there. The restaurant had become a gathering place full of gratitude, generosity, and community. A wall of kindness held prepaid meal vouchers for anyone in need. Julia discovered she had a natural talent for leadership, organizing, teaching, uplifting others. David had known it all along. 3 other towns had already asked about opening their own Julia's Table locations. Julia watched Michael help an elderly couple to their favorite booth. She remembered the night she stood outside the diner, bruised and defeated. Everything had changed because one man chose kindness. David appeared beside her with 2 cups of coffee. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked. "Just thinking how everything can change in a single moment," Julia replied. "How one act of kindness can ripple farther than we can ever imagine." "And that's what you do every day," David said with a smile. "You create those ripples." Subscribe for more interesting stories.